What is going on? Welcome back to Jiu-Jitsu Outlet. I'm sitting down with one of the best Jiu-Jitsu outlets in the world, Abe La Montagne. What is up, brother? How are you doing?
Good. How are you today, buddy?
I'm doing really good. We met a couple months ago at the ADCC East Coast Trials. You did a lot better than I did that weekend, man. You went on a wrecking spree, and then you just been doing the same thing at just about every single ADCC Open, at the West Coast Trials. Like, you've just been freaking crushing it, man. So congrats, dude. Congrats on all that success. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, I'm training at the best team in the world. I'm training all the time. I'm doing a lot of the things that I think a lot of people aren't willing to do. And I also am getting the best coaching you can possibly get. So I really owe it to my coach and my teammates, and I have great training partners. So I think a lot of that has a lot to do with my success, on top of personal habits that I think I've formed over the years.
Well, I want to talk about that. I want to chat about your training at New Wave and kind of what made you decide to uproot your life and go and start training under John Danaher. So I want to get into all that. But first, before we get into all that, I'm going to ask you the question that I start every podcast with, which is, how has training in jiu-jitsu helped your mental health since you started?
I've always been an athlete, like pretty much my entire life. I did various different sports. When I was a kid, I did football a lot. I lifted weights. I did all kinds of things. Pretty much, like, I think I started football when I was like 4 or 5 years old. So I've always been athletic. And to me, I think it's kind of like a strong association between essentially feeling good. And like, there's essentially been, like, I think what a lot of people suffer from today is they have no outlet for getting, plug in the word outlet. They have no ability to essentially exert all this frustration and energy in the form of a physical activity. And I think that, I come from a strong biological background, studying biochemistry, I was in a PhD program for that. But I look at humans no different than I see like animals. If you have a dog and it's uppity and anxious and depressed or something, it probably needs to exercise, go for a walk, or do something. And I think humans are the same. So the entirety of my experience in athletics has always just been a way. It's like walking a dog. And the thing is that I think some dogs are like German Shepherds, and then other dogs are like pugs. Pugs probably don't need that much of a walk. You could probably just play with them for like 5 minutes and they're going to be exhausted for a day or two. But like, if you have a Dalmatian, a German Shepherd, or a working breed, which I think a lot of guys are, I know I am, essentially, like, I need to go run. I need to do crazy things. I got to lift weights. I got to do stuff. And it's kind of like, I think a lot of dudes, it's like kids, for example. I think in a public education program, it's really interesting. You look at dudes and you look at girls. I think a lot of the current public education program, they want you to sit in a desk all day and just look at something. And I think a lot of girls are just better at kind of being compliant with like rules and stuff. And they don't have the same sort of energy things. Like, we literally have 16 times the amount of testosterone that females have. And I think testosterone is strongly correlated with going out, doing stuff, being aggressive or adventuring out. And boys, we do better when we're moving and we do things. So I think that's where I kind of go. So I guess I think I got meandered a little bit away from your original question, but essentially, it was essentially, has it been a good outlet for me, right?
Yeah. How does it help your mental health?
Yeah. Sorry. I was getting back to that, but more.
Oh, you're good.
It's essentially, it's like, I think a lot of people do their thinking through moving, but they don't realize it because they think of thinking as merely just what's happening in here. But I think, like, there'll be times I have like problems or something, or I'm thinking about it, but if I just go train for like 2 hours, I like realize, it's not going to be that big a deal. So I think it's ultimately, for me, it's a way that I kind of persevere and push through things and then come out of the other end, and I can think with a more calm, stable mind. Because sometimes the monster in our head is scarier than it is in reality, and exercise lets us do that.
Yeah, it's funny. You talked about testosterone and how that's a really important thing, which seems to be almost like a demonic conversation these days. Testosterone is supposed to be like the king of all evils, when actually for men, it's like the greatest thing that we're supposed to have. And I think that most men are lacking. And I think that's a big part of jiu-jitsu training, is it kind of gets you back in that state, and that's something that I've talked to a lot of people on this show who know a lot more than me about the science. Like the episodes I did with Musi and Corbury about the science behind jiu-jitsu. And that's something that he spoke a lot about, was that doing stuff like jiu-jitsu gets your dopamine going and there's science is finding that there's a causal relationship between dopamine and testosterone, that these two things are linked. So that when men start creating more dopamine, they also start creating more testosterone, which really just makes sense if you think about it, because dopamine is like the goal achievement chemical. So if you're out hunting, for example, if you're defending the tribe or something, back from an evolutionary perspective, it would make sense that dopamine and testosterone would build this sort of causal relationship that, as we're going and achieving these goals, we're going to need more testosterone. So science is confirming that. And I think that's what people feel when they train jiu-jitsu a lot. They feel like almost this little micro boost of testosterone that just feels really, really good. Like that's a part of testosterone.
Well, kind of playing off what you're saying is actually kind of interesting. I like to listen to a lot of Jordan Peterson stuff. And there was this one excerpt where he talks about, like, I think he brings up lobsters all the time. It's like this thing that he's associated with. But I don't think a lot of people know why he associates himself with lobsters. So he uses lobsters because they're an example of an ancient animal that literally lobsters haven't evolved, I think, for like 3 or 4 million years. So the lobsters now are extremely similar to the lobsters or what we would perceive as lobsters like 4 million years ago, but they have a serotonergic system. So they have a system that uses serotonin, but we also have a serotonin system. So people will not realize it, but lobsters can get depressed, for example, and you can give them antidepressants to treat depression, and you can give humans antidepressants. So the same drug, you can give literally both animals, and they will both react similarly, but that just shows how old our biology is, or how old the serotonergic system is. It's 4 million years old, which means that it's a pretty fundamental system for humans. So kind of playing off what you're saying with that dopamine, that testosterone, what a lot of our confidence is derived from is from actually like our ability to produce very basic fundamental hormones, one being serotonin, for example. Serotonin is like, it's like there's like dopamine, there's like serotonin, and then there's like a couple others, but those are like basically the main hormones that are associated with like good feelings. But serotonin's like what makes you feel connected, feel like you're purposeful, and stuff like that. A large way that you can increase this is actually through success. Like, so one of the interesting things that he brings up with the lobsters is the lobsters will like continuously fight. And when they fight, the lobster here, let's say this is lobster A and this is lobster B. If lobster A wins, he can like he stands up a little bit bigger and he's like more confident looking. But when this lobster B loses, he like scrunches in a little bit more and his posture starts lacking. And then over time, like after they fight, this is big lobster A. He's like big confident. He's like, oh yeah, I'm the shit. But he produces more serotonin than this one does. So the weak one won't produce it. But what's interesting is if you give serotonin to lobster B, he'll start standing up straight and then he'll start fighting lobster A again. So it's,
wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah, so it's like, that's why he talks about lobsters in that way. So the serotonergic system is strongly geared towards our confidence, our self-perception, how we view the world. And a lot of that's just from eating good, exercising, and sleep. And so something like that. But it's a fundamental system within humans and all animals. But that's why he brings up lobsters, is because we are so different from lobsters, and yet they still have it. So it's a fundamental system.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy. That makes a lot of sense, though.
Yeah. But yeah, you can give antidepressants to lobsters and they'll stop being depressed.
That's crazy, man. Will they start to develop suicidal tendencies over time, though? If they wean off of it?
Yeah. What's funny, what's really interesting is actually the male lobsters will try to imitate female lobsters. Like the lower their serotonin goes, the males will try to look and become more female-like. Is like an interesting thing. And I've heard the same thing with walruses. There's like, I think it might be walruses or it's a type of seal. But basically like they're kind of like gorillas where there's like one dude and he basically gets all the chicks and he's the dad of every chick. And what'll happen is that there are these like beta walruses or beta seals. And what they do is they pretend to be women. And like you just won't notice, so they'll act more feminine like in order to like hang out with all the girls. And then when the dude, the king seal or the king walrus is gone, the beta turns into a guy all of a sudden and he starts banging the chicks. Yeah.
Maybe that's kind of what's going on in today's society.
I definitely think I could see some relations. So people who
see if you
can't be a walrus, so they got to be a beta walrus. And then they're like, oh, he's gone. I'm totally an alpha walrus now. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey man, walruses might have some things figured out.
Yeah. Be fun.
They're smart animals. They're smart animals. Well, Abe, dude, I've got one more question for you before I ask you a little bit about New Wave. And that question is, how do you feel jiu-jitsu helps your life off the mat? Whether it be your relationships with other people or your, obviously your career now is in jiu-jitsu, but how do you feel like it helps your life?
I feel like I got to tap into a more primal side of myself. I think throughout time, I guess I think you could probably start with what people like about jiu-jitsu. I think collectively in general is it's like like people go hunting for vacation. It's kind of funny if you think about that. Like people go on a hunting trip. And so what that means is like the activity that we used to do to survive is now what people do for recreation. Right? They do it for fun. They go like, oh, I'm going to take me and my boy. We're going to go duck hunting. We're going to go get a buck. We're going to go get a moose. And that's literally what humans did for like forever. Most of time, they just went hunting and they got animals and stuff like that. And then you have today where people will go be an accountant for 80 hours a week just so they can go hunting on the weekend. Like they literally will do like 3 months of accounting so that they can go hunt for a weekend with their boy. And so the way that I kind of look at it as doing jiu-jitsu now is I'm just duck hunting. I've cut out the middleman and now all I do is duck hunt all the time. I'm doing essentially kind of what I would consider not to get all weird about it, but a more primal activity in the sense that I'm doing something that I think humans used to do much more commonplace, but I'm just happy to do it as like a career now. So how that affects me in my everyday life, I would say is mostly because I think guys are supposed to be confident. I think guys are supposed to have the ability to physically exert themselves. It's not that we need to be able to kick someone's ass, but we need to know that we can handle ourselves and provide. Like, because it's like, I don't think dudes look down on someone for just being small. It's that they can't be competent. Like, they can't be useful in a lot of ways. Because one thing that's cool about jiu-jitsu is you'll see these giant dudes that are like 7 feet tall and they're 300 pounds. But he's cool. But also the other guy who's like 140 pounds is good because we believe they're both competent to the extent of which that they're able. Like 140-pound dude doesn't need to be 6 foot, like 11, a 300-pound guy, because we understand that respectively to the person that they are competent, they are good. And I think it's really more about how you kind of present yourself. And that's what I think jiu-jitsu really does well, is it lets you just be confident. Like, it's kind of funny. I go to Walmart or I'll go to the store or something like that, and everybody just sees my ears and they like kind of have this, like, they evoke like, oh my God, what a badass. Like, how tough. And it's like, my girlfriend likes it. Like, my girlfriend's like, I think she just feels safer with me around. So I think there's like benefits to like that kind of stuff. But I think it's mostly just because I tap into something that I think humans used to do much more readily or have normalized.
That's very well said. That's very well said, man. I always think the cauliflower ear thing is kind of funny how people really respect it, because actually you get it by getting beat up. Yeah. So that's what I always tell people. I'm like, it just means I've gotten choked out a lot. Yeah. Actually, it's from getting caught in head and arm chokes or getting thrown around, with a headlock or something. Like, it doesn't come from you winning. Yeah. Usually,
I mean, there's something to being tough. They're like, oh, okay. I mean, but you look at someone like Khabib. Khabib wrecks everybody. He's got crazy cauliflower ear. It's just, through sheer atrophy or attrition, I could say, like, people are going to do it. Like, but like, I think they see people in the UFC, like, every time people are like, bro, you do UFC. And I'm like, yeah, totally. Yeah. I don't need, like, well, it's one of those things where I remember at first I tried to do the, technically I do MMA, but like just no striking. If you think about it, like, or I do jiu-jitsu, I do grappling. It's like wrestling, but with submissions. It's too annoying of an explanation. So anytime, like, if I remember one time I was at the park here with one of my buddies, Bruno. He's this Portuguese grappler, and essentially we were out just hanging out. It was a beautiful sunny day, and they come up like, "Bro, are you guys like MMA fighters?" And we just like looked at them. We looked at each other like, "Yeah." So it's just like, it's the easiest thing, because all they want to do is revere you, and then all you want to do is just like keep going on with your day. So it's just easier to just kind of do that. You don't have to get into this discussion how you're not technically as cool as they thought you were. You need a cool person. Let them.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, you train like wrestling, jiu-jitsu, a little bit of judo. That's MMA, right? That's like 3 martial arts.
I did a podcast with Scotty P, and I think you might have I don't know if you saw this reel where basically he was like asking, is jiu-jitsu a fight? And I said if boxing is a fight, then jiu-jitsu is a fight, because I was making the argument that if I went into a scrap and that, let's say I just never threw a punch and no one threw a punch at me, but I got his back and I strangled him out, you'd say I just had a fight. You know what I'm saying? And so it's just,
That's a good way to think. That's a good point.
yeah. So it's like,
Not
it doesn't stop becoming a fight just because I've, inoculated your, or I've taken out your ability for you to do anything. Like, it's just like, that's what the point of jiu-jitsu is it's a type of fighting of control. People just want to see the standing and banging and knockouts and falling onto the ground and stuff, but it's control. Like, animals don't even strike very often. Like, most animals grapple, and then we would say, oh, they're fighting. So
yeah, it's true. That's a good point. If you think about it,
yeah.
it's like pretty much the oldest form of fighting that there is, really. It's and I mean, this is like putting on the nerd hat, but jiu-jitsu, Japanese jiu-jitsu, was originally developed to be used in armor. The samurai would use it to throw each other to the ground.
I'm sorry, you just cut out for a second there.
Oh, my bad. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I just didn't hear anything, but I heard you say samurai throw each other down to the ground.
Well, I was saying all these things started with samurai and armor throwing each other to the ground, and that was the whole point of grappling, was that you couldn't strike because the other guy's in armor, and you might be able to do some impact, but it's more difficult. So they would throw each other, and then they would use the short sword to stab the person. And that's how all this stuff got started, because it was legitimately a better way of killing the person, not because of points or, oh, it looks better in TV or whatever. Like, this all started with legitimate martial use, and I think we lose sight of that.
No, 100%. I think an additional interesting thing is like, as much as we like to give the Japanese credit for jiu-jitsu, which Japan definitely, originated jiu-jitsu and judo, and that was definitely where I think a lot of what jiu-jitsu is, but especially with rule sets like ADCC, you're using more of it's like the mixed martial arts of grappling now, where essentially, like, wrestling is not a unique thing to Japan, right? And I would say that judo is a little different than typical wrestling, but now with the way that, like, so for example, I think what I would call, if I wanted to be hyper specific about like what style I practice, is called submission grappling. It's not necessarily jujitsu. Jujitsu is like a part of it. There's like wrestling, there's judo, and then I'd say that there's jujitsu. But jujitsu is typically the groundwork. Judo is going to be variations of throws with either hand techniques mixed in with foot techniques, so ashiwaza and newaza, and then essentially there's and then wrestling is like leg tackles and different types of picks from that, which kind of has a lot of overlap with judo, but it's this like mixing of all the different grappling arts together. So that's why I say it's like MMA in that way, but you just don't have striking.
Yeah, I think it's like the evolution of it all. And you got at something, you kind of brushed over it, but I want to linger on it a little longer, that the Japanese get a lot of credit for inventing this, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it all started with them. Because obviously fighting is fighting, and humans have been fighting all over the world since the dawn of civilization. One of the most popular episodes of this podcast is with a guy named Dr. Roddy Ferguson, all about how basically all of these martial arts are kind of one and the same. And he's a judo Olympian. He competed at ADCC. He competed in MMA and at the IBJJF World. So this is a guy who's like very well versed in grappling. Yeah. And that was the same consensus that he had as well, is that really they're all kind of the same thing. And one thing we spoke about on the show is that actually in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, there's this story of Jacob wrestling the angel. And or in some translations, it says that he wrestled God. Yeah. And it's like one of the first stories in Genesis. Yeah. And in the story, it says that God submitted him with a hip lock.
He literally on it, and he's like displaces it.
He displaces his hip and he makes him submit. Yeah. So Dr. Ferguson was like, that's some like 10th planet stuff. He's like, they're doing submission grappling in the Bible. He's like, it's right there. Literally, that's what it says. Put his hip out of place and he made him submit. What does that sound like? Some Eddie Bravo electric chair banana split nonsense. Like, God's a freaking savage, dude. That's what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying this stuff, like, we don't really know where it came from, and it has origins going back thousands of years.
Well, I think it's like I was kind of alluding to earlier. I think it's natural. Like, as soon as you have a body, you're going to end up having conflict. And if you have conflict, you're going to get into physical altercations until you have tools or something otherwise. So the most immediate thing you're going to do is grappling. Like, animals naturally will grapple. you look at monkeys, chimps, you look at lions, you look at like pretty much anything. They're all just like basically two bodies just colliding and start doing it. Very few animals will actually strike or have the ability to strike effectively. So grappling is actually pretty normal. Humans actually aren't that good at striking naturally. Like the fact that you have to tape up your hands or you have to do anything, like that's kind of the funny thing about MMA is they kind of like don't want you to fight naturally. They want you to wear gloves so to protect your hands. But if you protect your hands, like essentially you need tape and stuff to keep your hands from breaking. Because if you actually throw real punches, it's even a good puncher could break his hand. Like so, like if a guy actually knows it, I think kicks are pretty powerful. I think people can kick really effectively. I think we are designed to like kick really effectively, especially from like a bottom position to defend ourselves. But I think grappling is like the most intuitive thing. You have two weirdos at a bar, or if you watch a boxing match long enough, two people are tying up to defend themselves. Like oh, I don't want to get hit, ties up in the clinch, and then they have to separate them. So
Yeah, I always thought that was interesting too. Like boxing stops when grappling
yeah,
begins, and then they have to break them up a
yeah.
little bit. And it's interesting. You're right. Like if boxing can be considered a fight, grappling can as well. I agree.
Well, I think it's interesting is I think even if you look into a lot of MMA, from what I've gathered, it seems like the three core martial arts that if you were to do MMA that you would focus on would be jiu-jitsu, wrestling, and Muay Thai. So it's like what's interesting about that is two of the three are grappling, and then the third is still is like the most grapply type of striking because it's all about clinch work and getting close and tying in. It's not like staying really far away like karate's I believe very
Yeah.
precise and from a distance and coming in and then striking. It's still like there's clinches and getting in there. It's like so the three most effective and common types of martial arts that yield the most champions in like UFC history is going to be people who did wrestling, jiu-jitsu, and Muay Thai. Like those are the most common and effective.
Yeah.
And so but even the most striking oriented one is still kind of grappling, which is what's
Yeah, it's a good point. That's a good point. There's a lot of foot trips in Muay Thai too.
yeah, it's all kind of related. I mean, that's why it's like the other guy was saying. It's like, oh, it's basically just the same thing. There's like this Mukeda, like I think this one famous samurai. I believe it's I can't remember his name, but he's the guy who wrote the Book of Five Rings, I believe, and he's just like once you
Oh yeah, Musashi.
Musashi, yeah, he's like once you begin to see the way you see it in all things, and so but it's the same thing. So it's like once you get really good at wrestling, you begin realizing that jiu-jitsu is wrestling. And then once you get good at jiu-jitsu, you realize jiu-jitsu or wrestling is jiu-jitsu. And you start seeing all the same sorts of flows and patterns. And it's kind of like, I feel like a lot of time when I'm training, I'm repeatedly reminded of like the same patterns and sequences. Oh, we turn this guy here and then he goes down, or we take like a lot of time, for example, when you look at like a standing takedown, it's like, imagine you're always setting up a 3-legged table, right? Is typically how it is, or at least a 4-legged table, and you're making it so that it turns into a 2-legged table, and basically you're kicking his legs out and he has to fall in some way, right? So either you bring his feet together, he falls, or you remove both of his legs, like a double leg, you pick him up and you put him down, or you're standing up and you foot sweep him. So it's like constantly turning him into a 3-legged table and you remove the table. Like in Uchimata, for example, you have an overhook, you're walking into him or you're hopping into him, but you're making it so that his foot comes towards you. And as the feet come together, they serve as just one leg, no longer 2 legs split. So it's just, you end up seeing the same themes all the time. And you basically learn 5,000 moves by learning the concept to just one thing.
Man. And then that just transcends the mats too. And it goes to all areas of life. And something that I really admire about you, man, is you've been able to get to a really high level of jiu-jitsu with just a couple of years of training. And I know you attribute a lot of that to your study of John Danaher and ultimately moving to Austin to train with John Danaher and the team at New Wave, and making that, your life basically. So can you talk to us a little bit about that? What inspired you to want to make such a drastic shift? Mm-hmm. And what has that done for you and your life and just your overall career?
Like, so it's always interesting to kind of talk about like my rate of which, how I learned. So a few things, I openly tell people I did wrestle a bit growing up. It was helpful, but I don't think it's whenever I say I wrestled, I think they always assume because if we ever meet a wrestler, you meet the guy who does crazy high crotches and he's like super fast and dynamic and he moves super well and he can jump like a jaguar across the mat or something. I was never that guy. I was just a tough kid who I lost probably most of the time You know what I'm saying? My big thing that I remember having is like a badge of pride is I never got pinned in high school. I got pinned. I ended up getting pinned once though by the guy who was ranked second in the nation. I remember I was like super pissed and I was just like, I'm just going to be tough. So the way I look at wrestling is, I was just tough training. Like it made me have mental strength and it helped me get through a bunch of stuff that I was going through in my life and get out the door. But I wasn't like some amazing like leg lock or not leg lock takedown specialist or anything like that. There's some fundamentals you could say that did help me later, but then I stopped wrestling when I was 18 and then I picked up jiu-jitsu again when I was 25. So that was at least like 7 years difference. So getting back to your original question, um, I've always been athletic my entire life. And I've always been kind of like physical as a person. So I think it's kind of like, it's like a duck in water, as they say, like essentially when I got into it, I was like, oh, I'm home. And I think something that actually kind of helped me as an athlete is I started jiu-jitsu late in life after I've already done a career. I was in a PhD program for biochemistry. I did a lot of science jobs and I've done a number of other things. I was in the military. So I felt like kind of the fact that I had already so much life experience, I went into jiu-jitsu with kind of 2 feet into it. Like I knew it was just something to do. I eventually got to a point where all the jobs that I was doing were just so I could support my hobbies. Like I had no ambitions of becoming like the VP or something of a company. I didn't really care about that. I pretty much just go to work so I can make money, pay my rent, and then go to jiu-jitsu and not feel guilty about it. I started doing hobbies. I bodybuilt and everything like that before I did jiu-jitsu, but then bodybuilding kind of like it doesn't have the same sort of like brotherhood or funness of jiu-jitsu. It gets boring just going to the gym. Like as soon as you stop putting like 10 pounds on the bar every week, you get to a point where it's stagnant. But jiu-jitsu is pretty fun because you can always examine something new and learn something new. So it's fast paced as a hobby, I would say. So it was able to kind of keep my interest, I would say, as I would go into jiu-jitsu. And then very early on, I had a person who was a great influence on my jiu-jitsu career who actually pointed me to John after like training for like 3 weeks. I think he just heard me talk and I think he just said, oh, this guy's a huge nerd. He probably likes huge nerds. So he said, John Danaher is the guy you should learn from. And so then I went home and I bought like a bunch of John, I think Taking the Back videos or something like that. I bought like a bunch of them and I just started studying those. And I kind of had a hard time learning from a lot of the teachers I had early on because I felt like they weren't very articulate or specific about why you would do things. They'd be like, all right, take the arm and you bend it. You bend the crap out of it. Like something like that. It'd be just a very bro-y kind of way of explaining it when I feel like I needed a deeper understanding. And I was lucky because I got my earliest education was from someone like John, who I think is very similar to myself, comes from an academic background. And there's a certain, I guess, expectation of a certain type of explanation that is required in academia that I had become accustomed to. And I was looking for that in jiu-jitsu. And thankfully I found John, and many of the new wave guys. Many of the new wave guys are very good about explaining stuff with great detail.
That's what I found at a lot of these higher level schools is there's the coach, but then there's also all of the students as well who almost become like your secondary coaches in a big way. Can you talk a little bit about that dynamic? Like what's it like between John and the other coaches there and how do they each kind of, I guess, how is the training structured between John and the other coaches?
Well, John teaches like 99% of the classes, but I will say though that one thing that's really interesting that I've seen as I've been on the team for almost like 2.5 years now, and in an official capacity. So I would say, even though I'd say I've been learning from John for 5 years, but in official capacity, I've been learning from John for about 2.5 as like his student under him directly. What I would say is that an interesting thing about John is I actually think that he's very encouraging of his students' teaching techniques. In addition, I think he sees us as, one thing that I think a lot of people at other schools don't have that their coach is trying to do is their coach is just trying to be the only teacher. And they want you to become maybe a proficient athlete, but they're kind of doing it so they can kind of like, look how good this guy is. I made him good. What they're also not giving them are the skills to create great athletes. So I think something that's interesting about John is even if you don't become like an amazing world champion, I might not ever win an ADCC title, but I know I'm going to be one of the best teachers in 20 years. You know what I'm saying? Like he's giving me groundwork to be an amazing instructor for jiu-jitsu. And I take from a lot of my previous experiences and things like that. And that helps me as a person. But I think everybody in New Wave that I can say that's there long enough becomes a good teacher of jiu-jitsu, right? And it's not just a repeat things as much as it is understanding things to a deeper level. I think that there's so just like there's a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and a PhD, I think that there are levels to depth of understanding for something. So a bachelor's is just merely memorization, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And then you get to a master's, and I think that they have a comprehensive understanding of it, and to the point to where they're a specialist. They can do all kinds of stuff. They can explain it, they can teach it, they can articulate it. You can give them a job to do, and they'll be like, okay, I'll show a basic class on arm bars. All right. What a PhD is, and what I think a PhD and a black belt are synonymous. I think they're the same thing, or what you should aspire. If you're a black belt, you should aspire to be a PhD in jiu-jitsu. And I would say that that means that you have the ability to create new techniques. You have the ability to create new information, but you have an ability to assess its quality. You don't just say, "Oh, I created the boob, the boob, like the bob switch." And because I think a lot of people, they want to create moves that aren't actually that good, but they just want to come up with something, and they just want to put their name on something, but they're usually terrible. Like it's interesting in biology, there are mutations that happen all the time, and 99.9999% of them are terrible, or they do nothing, or they're useless. But then there's that 0.0001% chance of a mutation that actually helps the individual or helps or something like that. But you have to get good at understanding how to differentiate between the two. Because if you start spending all your time doing a bob lock, and bob lock doesn't do anything, then you're going to waste your time developing something that has nowhere to go. It's kind of like when a lot of people are training, they will focus on wrist locks, let's say. And a wrist lock, it's not like a bad move to have. It's great to have it in the totality of jiu-jitsu, but it's usually best used as a means of creating movement. But there will be some guys that are like, bro, I'm a wrist lock specialist. And it's like, well, that's kind of terrible. Why didn't you just put that time into becoming a rear naked specialist? Oh, I don't want to be generic and everything else. It was like, well, I guess you don't want to be good at jiu-jitsu. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, one of my coaches once said that if you look at moves that are on highlight reels, such as a wrist lock, for instance, these moves that are very kind of rare, he said these moves that are on highlight reels, they're on highlight reels because they're uncommon and they don't work most of the time. So when they do work, they end up on the highlight reel and everyone's like, oh my God, he hit a wrist lock. And he was like, you know what? It doesn't go on the highlight reel is single leg to run the pipe to side control.
Yeah.
You know, and stuff like that to get on mount, and stuff like that. People don't make a highlight reel out of that, but that's what is most common. You know.
No, I always think it's kind of funny because they have a thing called Thursday Night Jiu-Jitsu here in Austin, and I like it. It's a great event, and it's awesome that they put it on. But they give a submission of the night thing for like a bonus, like you can get an award or something. I think it's usually like a gift card to some food, and it's hilarious because they always will give submission of the night to like whatever's weird, you know what I mean? But I think you should give it to whatever did the cleanest, best sub. Like it could be a weird one, but it's like, why don't you give it to the cleanest armbar there? Like the guy did a perfect armbar, but they always want to give it to the flying moves. Flying armbars, okay, he got that, I guess, but it's always a flying move or a flying triangle or flying something, exotic, crazy moves, as opposed to a technically proficient move, which is what we should aspire to anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Rear naked choke is the statistically most dominant win. You know,
the best one. If you became just a specialist in back takes and finishes from the back, you would probably have the most success just doing that. Like that's why you get these big giant dudes who literally, it's so funny because I feel like all you have to do to tell them is get good at passing and getting to the back, and you will win over and over again. Like literally, like they're super strong, they're big. All they have to do is work on taking them the back, and it'll put them in a nice place. Like obviously, there's some other things. Maybe learn some legs too. But if you're a big sturdy guy taking the back, that's the best kind of specialist to be if you're going to be a specialist.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's what I've been trying to do lately too. Is just like get to the back.
Yeah, get into the back. The only other option I think would be leg lock specialist, but leg locks is an interesting thing because I was thinking about this recently, where the top 3 highest submissions at ADCC are the rear naked. It's number 1. The inside heel hook is number 2, and then the outside heel hook is number 3. But if you combine the 2 leg locks together, then it's heel hooks in general, but they're a little bit different. But the thing is that a lot of people will specialize in leg locks really early on in their career because they can get easier wins. I think it's accessible. You don't have to learn how to pass a guard or sweep somebody to do a leg lock or a heel hook, I should say. So they'll just focus on that. So it's not a bad thing. I actually think that's what I did early on. I just like said, oh, I guess I'll just learn heel hooks. And I remember I made a lot of black belts kind of salty because I would heel hook them, but they'd be like, but you don't ever hit Kimuras or you don't hit arm bars. And I'm like, yeah, but I subbed you with that one, so it was okay. Like, so, but the thing that's nice about it is I think moves like the rear naked, if you can get them interested, or the heel hook, it allows you to keep them interested long enough, but then they have the expectation, the next battle they have to do is get out of that comfort zone and learn triangles, Kimuras, and like all the other things that maybe aren't as high percentage, but they would help your primary attack. Because like if you go for the back, you should also be able to transition to an arm bar or a rear triangle or something like that, and that'll make your actual rear naked better because you'll have multiple options.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You got to specialize and then go wide, I think is a good way to approach these things. Yeah. And dude, well, I wanted to ask you about this. This is something we've been talking about on the show a little bit more, is psychedelic medicines. This has been populated, you know, it's becoming a lot more popular these days. Johns Hopkins is doing this big research study into psilocybin mushrooms and how it helps with mental health and stuff like that. And what do you think? Do you think that martial artists use psychedelics, or have you found that most people like us kind of stay away from that nonsense?
I think if you're from 10th Planet, oh yeah, you're probably using hella psychedelics. I mean, I think psychedelics are great. I think there's a ton of data and evidence that proves that they have extreme antidepressive, anti-anxiety, reducing potential and ability. In the few studies that they've done, I think the only unfortunate thing about psychedelics at this point is that historically they've kind of been frowned upon or negatively stigmatized because of whatever kind of reason that they were trying to do. You could get into like conspiracy reasons when they'd be like, oh, well, basically a tab of acid's $10, but then you can get, and that'll treat your depression actually as far as a year and a half into the future. But antidepressants, which actually don't treat depression, they just reduce symptoms. You can get them using it all the time and every day. So you can make the big pharma argument, I think, if you want, because psychedelics, one, you can also get most of them naturally, like in nature. So if you just give someone psilocybin mushrooms, they could treat their depression. They have one hit, and they have one trip. It's meaningful or whatever. And it's strongly associated with basically periodic reductions in depression and anxiety up to like a year and a half in the future. And they actually only don't know that it doesn't help longer is because they haven't done studies that far into the future. So there's possibility that it actually could help you longer than a year and a half. And that's from one dose. I remember reading a paper when I was in grad school. I was like, I tell myself every day I had to read 3 academic papers. And one paper was on my field that I was in, which is biochemistry. Another was on the field that I had specialized in, which was like bacteriophages and viral engineering and other things based off whatever work I was doing at the time. The third was for fun. And so sometimes for fun, I would read more psychedelic papers. And one of the interesting things about psychedelics is there's like strong evidence to show that they have like neural pathway regeneration. So a lot of the time when people undergo trauma as children or as young people, they like sever the connections in their brain. And that's oftentimes where certain weird personality effects might come from, or things that people would call psychological inhibitions or inabilities, like someone feeling sensitive for an instance. Some people might be harsher. Like if a person's been traumatized when they were young, they might not be able to relate or as open with each other, but it could literally be they have severed nerve connections in their brain. And that what happens, it's strangely enough with psilocybin and acid and all these other types of drugs, is that they induce the production and the regeneration of these severed attachments. So some of these people, there was an interesting episode of Star Trek. I don't know if you ever watched Star Trek, but in Next Generation, I think it was, there was this guy who was running away from a planet that they were like going by, and he like beams onto the ship or something, but they have essentially medicine that is outdated, or like they've like are really archaic basically. And so this guy has like some sort of weird block or brain or like a blood clot in his brain. And so what they do is they like examine his brain, and what they do is, because it's Star Trek, they heal him. And what happens is that this guy, before they healed him, was like a criminal. He killed like 30 people. He stole from people. He was a felon. He had all these things. But then what they did is they healed his brain. They saw like, oh, there's just a block. Clearly, they just hadn't seen that. They don't have maybe the technology to do it. And then as soon as they removed the blood clot or they fixed his brain and allowed his brain to properly be healthy and grow, he immediately was sympathetic and he was like, oh my God, I killed all those people. I mistreated all those people. And so the thing is it's like a lot of these people, I think, that are dealing with, BS or whatever in their life, they probably just have a brain that's been damaged or hurt from trauma and BS like that. And then something like psychedelics actually helps them to heal. And then they become more sympathetic and more caring. And it's like they are able to regenerate and feel safer. It's kind of like the lobster thing I said earlier. So it's a big answer.
That's very well said. Thanks for unpacking that for us, man. I think that psychedelics have so much healing potential. They've certainly helped me a lot. They've radically changed the course of my life when I utilized them back in the day. And I had a lot of benefits, and I know that I'm definitely not alone. And that's just like anecdotal, but also science is now finding that there's a lot of people who are getting real benefits from this. So that's awesome to see. And I found that a lot of people in the martial arts community use psychedelics, especially microdoses. They use microdoses almost like a performance enhancer, but for the mind. I was curious if you've found the same sort of thing. Like I know a lot of people who they might have like an MMA fight coming up or a big jiu-jitsu tournament like the ADCC Trials or IBJJF Worlds or something. And they utilize microdosing during the camp to help them prepare. Have you seen people do that too? Like obviously we don't have to name any names, but I'm just curious what you've seen kind of from your neck of the woods.
I mean, there's one person that comes to mind that I know that does microdose, but it's like one of those things where I also think they're just a really good athlete and they're also very technical. So it's kind of like hard to know, like which came first, the chicken or the egg. Like, is it because of their psychedelic use that they're very, very technical and good? Or is it because they're really technical and good that they're able to do everything and they have good habits outside of this, right? So it is a cumulative effort. I think you'd probably, like, the interesting thing is that it would be difficult for me to make an assessment without having seen where they started and where they went. And then I'd have to see if their training changed, or maybe if their training did change, did it change because of the influence of this microdosing effect and stuff like that? There's obviously like a ton of data that supports using microdosing as like an ability to stay interested more and to keep you gripped and stuff. I've never really messed around with microdosing or anything, so I can't tell you from personal experience. But I know that there is evidence that says that it could be helpful and good. But I think a lot of the time, I think probably the biggest thing that I think a lot of people struggle with, because I can tell you from like times I've done it, I remember like if I did acid, I remember like looking at my phone and thinking this is the most boring thing ever. And I like literally didn't care. Whereas like maybe that's like part of the problem is too many people are distracted by a lot of things. So they don't focus on deeper, more more purposeful activities. Whereas when you're on that kind of stuff, and maybe this happens with microdosing, to some extent, is that you're kind of like less interested in like a phone or something like that. And you find things more interesting. I remember when I've done things like that. I remember all I wanted to do was just like go outside and play with my dog. You know what I mean? And jiu-jitsu's kind of like a tribal like thing. It's kind of nature like. It's like literally just like wrestling with like, animals do that all the time. So I think sometimes, not trying to get all hippy dippy about it, but I do think it causes us to essentially engage in what would be considered more primal like activities.
Yeah, I've found the same. I think psychedelics like connect you with your true self. They connect you with the world, with nature, and really ultimately with the cycle of evolution, I think is what they connect you with, like just with the reality of the world. Like a lot of the psychedelic experiences that I've had, especially the more intense ones, they always seem to draw back to that at the end of just kind of trying to refocus my perspective on the fact that this is really, it all started as just this primal existence. And this reality that we're experiencing now, it all began as you and me were on the savannah hunting bison with spears. And if you think about that and really wrap your head around it, it's crazy. And you start to think about like what life was like for millions of years. And then suddenly it's just like this robotic version of that same reality. And people wonder why they're so depressed, and they wonder why they're so overweight or why they're unhappy and all this other stuff. And it's like, well, we got away, kind of like you said at the beginning of our conversation. Now those things that used to just be our day-to-day life, like hunting, now we have to pay a ton of money and go take a week off from the factory to go have that experience, when really that's a central part of being a human being. And I think jiu-jitsu reconnects us with that. I think you're totally right.
Yeah. It's like, it's all kind of the thing that I immediately, not trying to, like, what is that, the carnivore? Well, what's the carnivore guy, the primal or whatever? I'm not trying to get a
Liver King.
That's
Liver
right.
King.
I'm not trying to get all Liver King about it, but I definitely think that there's, like, if you have it's like kind of like interesting where we have animals that are in a zoo, right? And you don't just put animals in like a concrete cage and have nothing. We all understand that, like, it's like, you ever play Zoo Tycoon?
Oh yeah, that was
Remember
great.
Zoo Tycoon? You built a cage, and if you put the monkeys in like a snow environment, they had like the frowny face, and they're like, I don't like that. Stop putting that in here. And then,
you're right.
And then if you put the jungle stuff in there, they're like, smiley face. I like this. This is good. And they're even like specific about the number of rocks and stuff like that. But what's interesting is that humans don't think they're like that at all. And so the thing is that we're supposed to have a particular environment that's like similar to our native environment, to whatever you want to determine that is. So the thing is, I'm just trying to put the green smiley faces on in my life all the time. And the thing is that jiu-jitsu is one of those things that puts the green smiley face, and living in an office and working like that is a frowny face. Like, you know what I'm saying? And it's like, but you basically have these figurative bananas you're trying to fight for. And you're like, but what if I had 1,000,000 bananas? 1,000,000 bananas would be amazing. And I'm like, but do you really need 1,000,000 bananas? And I think it's really hard because us as guys, especially, like, at one point we were just hunting mammoth, and we got really good at hunting mammoth. And, you know, ancient whoever we were was hunting the mammoth and bringing them down and launching spears. And they were the best spear chucker in the thing. And they're like, yeah, dude, that's great. But then eventually some dude was like, yeah, you don't need to hunt mammoths. You can just grow seeds. You can grow things out of the ground. You know, some guy got really better at doing an alternative thing, and then they realized, oh, this is kind of more efficient in the long run if you do it. And then that guy became the new mammoth hunter. And then eventually the farmer became also like a textiles guy, because we had such an excess of food. People could literally make their job not hunting or looking for food all the time. They started making like hats, or they started making textiles or other things or other tools, because they could trade for the food, because they had alternative needs and stuff like that helped them do it. Then eventually it became an IT guy in a business company or something like that. That was like, I solve your computer problems when your MacBook doesn't work. And then that is now equivalent to the mammoth hunting at the end of the day. But then this guy's like, dude, I'm like the best at fixing your MacBook now. And he's like, it's the same pride of like a guy who hunted a mammoth, but he doesn't. Like, if you give a guy like that like $1,000,000, I don't think he's going to feel as good about his. It's like weird, because I feel like whenever I've done jobs where they like deposit money into your bank account, it like doesn't feel as rewarding as I think of someone handing you $100, for example. Like, maybe they could put like $5,000 in my bank account. I'll be happy. Like, I'm not happy about it, but it's like, oh, okay, I guess that's kind of the thing. You kind of get normalized this expectation that you can go to work and do stuff. But when you have to like do like a private for me, for example, for like an hour, and then a guy gives me a bunch of money, I kind of feel like I earned it more, because I saw the immediate gratification. I didn't have to wait for my paycheck to come in and then associate it with it. But it's like, as I'm doing the action, I immediately get the reward. You know what I'm saying? So it's like that. Yeah. So it's like, whereas I think humans are like that. It's like how dogs are. You got to give them treats immediately when they do the trick right, so that they learn to do the trick more, right? Humans aren't that different. It's just like we have to do some sort of weird cognitive dissonance anytime that we want to like do something. And I think the more unnatural and weird it gets, like the harder it is for us to feel like we're doing something meaningful.
Yeah, man, 100%. And that physical somatic response is such an important part of it. Like, when you get that physiological response to whatever it is you're doing, it makes it a lot more powerful. Yeah. For sure. For sure.
It's funny. Me and my little brother, you ever watch Breaking Bad?
It's the greatest, one of the greatest.
Really, it's a great show. But there's this one scene that me and my little brother talk about where Heisenberg, or what was the main character's name? Could you remind me? Walter White. Right. So Walter White, he goes in there, and this is after Jesse got his ass beat by Tuco, and they took the meth and everything like that. And so he goes in there, and he has the bag of the fake meth that like explodes everything. And he's like, give me the fucking money or I'm going to destroy everybody in here. And then he's like, fine. And then he like ends up giving him the money and he says, I'm going to make more meth and does all this thing. But then when he goes into that car and he gets in there and he like walks away and he managed to not die and he has all the money and he's like looking at it. And then he's just like he's at the steering wheel and he's like, ah, yeah, like it's like the most primal thing in the world. But the thing is, I think we men are supposed to feel that. Like, that's why I don't feel that when I had money deposited into my bank account or whatever, right? It's like it's an indirect feeling. But when someone hands me money, I feel that more so. Or when but I think you would feel that even more so when you go hunting, right? You shoot the arrow, you kill the deer, and then you go over there and you're like, yes, like, because you get that immediate, like, your prize is right there. You know what I mean? I think something that, like that, I feel like romance is killed today because of online dating and stuff like that, where a guy never has the pride to just walk up to a girl in front of a bunch of people and be like, hey, I think you're cute, and then want to talk to her. You know what I mean? But I feel like, I know a lot of people have happy relationships that didn't derive from like, normal circumstances, I guess. But I think I would argue that people probably feel proudest and happiest if they had the balls to go up to some cute girl at a bar or in a public location and just say a real good one-liner, and then, that earn their girlfriend or earn their, the girl to be like, because I think they would just feel better about themselves doing it instead of, I feel like, kind of like sneaking around and hiding, like, hi, do you like me? I sent you a DM. Yeah.
Yeah, and going back to what you said about martial arts, it gives you that confidence.
I know I said all kinds of bullshit. Sorry about that. I know I went all over the.
No, we're bringing it all back home, man. We're bringing it all back home to the confidence, because martial arts, I think, gives you that confidence to do that stuff. But dude, we got to wrap this up. Before we do, though, I know you got a new YouTube channel that's really taken off. I've really been loving some of your latest videos. Can you tell us a little bit about the YouTube channel and just anything else that you're trying to promote?
Yeah, I have a lot of stuff on my Instagram, is where I'm kind of primarily focusing right now. I'll be getting back to more YouTube videos when my girlfriend spilled milk on my laptop like a couple weeks ago. So my laptop had everything on there and it was just set up for it. So I'll get back to making YouTube videos soon enough. But right now I try to make like one video a month. I try to focus on something that's not just technique or something, but it's more like talking about the ideas of jiu-jitsu and I think more deeper philosophical approaches. I did videos on the comparison of gi versus no gi or training etiquette and stuff like that. Deeper things. So I'm always interested. If you want to find me on YouTube, it's Abraham the Mountain. Same thing as my Instagram. Additionally, with my Instagram, I now have a subscription format. So if you go to my Instagram, a lot of people really like my reverse close guard system that I've been innovating and come up with. You've seen a ton of people start to do it in the last like couple of years now that were influenced by me. I remember I taught William Tackett actually how to do an A block like a year and a half ago, and he literally hit it in the finals against J-Rod. So it was probably one of the most fantastic finishes that we've seen in like a long time. It was crazy, and it was awesome to kind of see it out there on like the big stage and stuff. So if you want to learn more about that and a lot of that, I have an Instagram subscription where I teach a lot of techniques specifically for reverse close guard, as well as many other positions and insight. So I show a lot of techniques on my Instagram normally, but this is more of the deeper, more detailed content that you would pay for.
Dude, well, I appreciate that, and I'll put all the links down below, so go check it out. And for those who are wondering, could you give us like a quick rundown on what exactly is the A block, this fantastic invention of yours that is sweeping the nation?
I would, if I'm just going to say what everybody else says, is, it's just a toe hold. I'll let you think that. And it's funny because I think people who think it's just a toe hold will end up not doing it correctly. Basically it's like the way I always describe it is it's an outside heel hook disguised as a toe hold. If you want more information on it, you'd have to probably just see it. And I think the best way you could see it is just go to my Instagram. You could see it. But more or less, if I was just to try to give a quick rundown, is I'm in reverse close guard. So it's close guard, but reverse. I usually control both legs or at least one. If I control one, the arm that's hugging it to my chest, like I'm doing like the Pledge of Allegiance, I grab the toes and I pull in, and then the forearm will have a bite on the heel. So more like a heel hook, and I flex it in, and then I come over with my hand and I can crunch it in. So it makes a really nasty ankle break and even knee breaks in some extreme cases as well.
Well, I'll put a link down below for people who want to check it out so they can go watch your video. But yeah, it almost looks to me like a two-handed toe hold that's more of like applying like a heel hook pressure
Yeah.
from the look of it.
Yeah.
But I'm going to have to play with it because I haven't really gotten a chance to drill with it yet. So I'm going to check it out, man. But I really want to add it to my game because it looks pretty brutal.
Subscribe to my Instagram if you want to see stuff about it. So
hell yeah, man. Well, I'll put all the links below. And dude, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you got a lot going on. You're busy training to be an ass kicking ninja down there in Austin. So appreciate you, man. Thank you for
having me.
Anytime, dude.